Postgame, the Rockets get a huge 114-104 win in Cleveland, a game that felt a bit like a roller coaster ride without much thrilling uh, rides as far as our emotional dips in the first half. Rockets pretty much dominated that game, and you felt like they were up by 30 plus. Then the drama unfolded in the third and early fourth, and the Rockets sort of held on for dear life. But Ben, Aaron Holiday comes up really big in the fourth quarter, and then Şengün closes them out on a night when Kevin Durant really didn't have it going.
Well, and it was a weird game from the start, as you mentioned, but I think big picture, Dave, you've got a spreadsheet in which you keep track of expected wins and losses. For
Yep.
me, this is a really good win. It doesn't matter how you got it. This was a 64-win team from a year ago. You were on the road. On paper, this is one of your most difficult games all year. I know they didn't have Darius Garland and a couple other guys were out as well. Well, the Rockets don't have Tari Eason or Anthony Smith for Van Fleet, so I don't think the Rockets are at an injury advantage by any means. So to get this win on the road against a Cleveland team with Donovan Mitchell, and he struggled in the first three quarters, was great in the fourth, had Evan Mobley, had Jared Allen. Before we get to the individual storylines, like this has to be one of the best wins that you can have all year long, strictly from a probability perspective, right?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, it's funny you say that because I actually just updated the spreadsheet, hadn't done it in a couple of games. This puts them right back on track.
Mm,
That Detroit game put them a game behind.
right.
This was a game I projected the Rockets to lose, and they pull it out. But yeah, I mean, Rockets 10-3. Their net rating is up there with the elite teams. You got to be excited about where they are. Now, I will say there's a lot to pick apart in this game and a lot of good things as well. But on a night when KD, I believe he finished 6 of 18. I have
Yep.
to double check the box. The guy who is your closer, really, it was so nice to see Holiday hit big shots in the fourth quarter, and then Şengün sort of play the role of closer and close them out. That just shows you that there's a lot of versatility with the team, and they can beat you in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to just how aware Kevin Durant is of Alperen Şengün. Like, there's a clear respect there because this is not the first time. We talked about it late in the Orlando game, the Milwaukee game. KD, for all of his accomplishments, is willing to take a back seat, especially if Alperen Şengün has it going on, which he did tonight, and KD, for his part, was struggling. So I think that's good awareness by Kevin. It would be easy for someone that's as accomplished as he is, a multi-time champion, former MVP, perennial all-star, to say, hey, this is my time. No, he's increasingly shown a willingness to defer if it's in the best interest of the team. So you give him credit for that. I think down the stretch of the game, when the Rockets had both Şengün and KD out there, they're generally able to get a good shot because the gravity of those two guys, when they're on the floor at once, you can find the matchup that you want, and you should be able to get a pretty good shot unless you do something stupid and turn the ball over. I think where it gets tricky are the stretches when it's just one of them out there, especially in the second half, because teams can really load up against the one star that's out there. And then you need your other four players, none of which are an all star, to be able to generate offense out of those 4-on-3 scenarios. And that's where, having a minimum player like Aaron Holiday is just so important that is not one dimensional. Yes, he's a really good shooter. He's almost at 50% on threes this season and is at about 40% over his 3 years with the Rockets, but he's also able to handle the ball, drive. He's is able to do a lot of different things. And that's so important to have role players that are not one dimensional because to survive those minutes when, especially on the road, like Cleveland has all the momentum, they're going to take the ball out of, and I think midway through the fourth quarter, it was KD was on the floor and Şengün was off. And so even though it was a cold game for KD, they were not going to let KD beat them once he checked back in at about the 7-8 minute mark. And those were the 3 minutes where Aaron Holiday just went off. And a lot of times teams will sort of live with the results out of those, they give up the 4-on-3. But when you have a guy like Holiday that can both shoot and handle the ball, that's just so important. I don't know how the Rockets were able to keep him for the minimum. Amazing work by
Yeah.
Rafael Stone. Obviously, Ime Udoka, the culture that he's instilled, I think for Aaron he's 29 years old now, I think that probably made him a lot more likely to stick around because he's not at the point of his career where you can reasonably expect him to, be given a much greater role. So Rafael and Ime, hat tip to them. But I just think that from a roster composition perspective, to have a guy near the end of your bench that isn't one dimensional, that can come in and fill it up, not just as a shooter, but as a scorer, even though he's small, Dave, he's got he's got a nice handle. He's got a mid-range game. He's got a floater. That's just so important because as the Rockets play better teams, especially on the road, and I also thought they got a shaky whistle. We can talk. The Cavs missed some free throws. Donovan Mitchell was terrible the first three quarters. Well, the counter, I thought the Rockets did not get a good whistle, especially in the second half. They missed a ton of shots right at the rim, and yet they won by double digits on the road. And of course, a lot of that speaks to what Aaron Holiday did. And I think having a player like that is so important because when you're a good team and you go on the road against other good teams, they're going to do everything they can to take your big guns out of the game. And so to have a guy who on paper looks like your fourth or fifth option in that unit, able to do what Aaron can do offensively as a shooter and a scorer, that's absolutely massive. Just to, again, before we go into the individuals beyond Aaron, because certainly Şengün was the player of the game, I think we need to start hat tip to Rafael and Ime for bringing back a player who he didn't even start the season in the rotation, but boy, does he look like a rotation player now.
Yeah, I believe he was 5 of 7 from the field, 3 of 5 tonight from three. He had 14 of his 18 points. This is Aaron Holiday we're talking about in the fourth quarter, which they needed them because for much of this game, the Rockets kind of dominated on both ends. Like they were good offensively, not great, but they were good. And defensively, they played much better. But I mean, I will say also the Cavs missed a ton of shots. The Cavs were 4 of 23 from 3-point range, I think, up till early third quarter. And we were making note of this, like, wow, this is laughably bad. And they finished from that point, 4 of 23 going 8 of 16, which is when the roller coaster really kicked in and the Rockets were, trying to hold on for dear life. Suddenly it was I think, did they get it as close to as one?
They got it to one. Yeah.
Okay. And, it was just kind of staggering because it really did feel like the Rockets were crushing the Cavs for most of the first half. Second chance points dominated again by the Rockets, 21-6. Adams huge there, Şengün as well. It's being talked about in the chat. There was a third quarter when the Rockets were up 10, or I believe they were up 14, excuse me. They brought in a kind of funky lineup, and we noted in real time, why is Holiday not coming in and Tate was coming in? And I don't want to blame Jae'Sean Tate for the whole thing. This was only a little over 2-minute stretch, but it was really ugly basketball. And they went from 14 to 10. And then it quickly, even though they got that lineup out, it still kept going down. What really did was, it was kind of striking because Holiday did come in and was the hero in the fourth after that. I think Ime probably regrets it. I'm not sure why he was going with Jae'Sean Tate in that particular moment. But Holiday certainly stepped up when called upon tonight.
Well, I think it was the combination of Tate, Okogie, and Capella. We talked about Holiday not being one-dimensional. That's 3 players right there that are largely one-dimensional. And even if your other 2 players are Kevin Durant and Reed Sheppard, which I believe that was the 5 at the time, I mean, that's a lot of the court where defenders just aren't having to respect those areas other than, Okogie's a capable 3-point shooter. And then Tate, I also think Tate's a guy, if he gets a consistent role, I think he's still a solid player. But I think Tate's a classic example of someone who's not great in a pinch because he tends to want to play too hard. And we've seen him the last couple of weeks in these little cameos that he's gotten into foul trouble. He's way too aggressive. And I just think, Tate's a classic guy. If he can settle into the game, but this team is just too deep to give him the type of minutes, barring major injuries. If he can settle into a game, then he'll probably be okay. But if you're asking Tate to go out there and play, 5-10 minutes, I don't know. Like, it's just, for me, his playing style, it's a classic setup where he's probably going to try and do too much. In the last couple of games when he's got in there, he's gotten in foul trouble. And part of what let Cleveland back in the game, they got in the bonus very early in the third and fourth quarters. And so that's something the Rockets, the one benefit of the doubt that I will give to Ime Udoka, I could see, the first half of that game when I think the Cavs had just 40 in the first half and they were at 37 until the final minute of the first half. I could see, I'm sure internally they loved how physical they were playing. And I suspect they wanted to just win that game with physicality and defense. And so in theory, you bring in Tate, Okogie, Capella. That's that type of bruising lineup to where maybe you can, impose your will on the other team, especially because they went to the double big with starting Steven Adams. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I just think it wasn't a great game feel because when the Rockets went to that Tate, Capella, Okogie lineup, I think the lead had already been cut from, it was as large as 22. And I want to say it was down to like 12-ish at that point. So if you were up 20, or you were playing well, I could sort of understand it saying, hey, like I want to, you know, just maintain this physical advantage. But given the game flow at that point and that Cleveland was starting to, get into a rhythm offensively, I didn't like it. It struck me as something that maybe Ime and the staff talked about at halftime and said this might work for this particular game. But then the way the third quarter started, it didn't make sense. And so, yeah, it made things a lot hairier than they needed to be. And then
Yeah.
Donovan Mitchell hit the Rockets with a haymaker. But look, we can go both ways on the what if thing. Like you mentioned, the shots the Cavs missed and
Yeah.
Donovan being cold the first three quarters. But man, Ime Thompson, like we've talked about it. And to his credit, he finished the game well. In the fourth quarter, he made a couple of big plays down the stretch, but he had some bunnies that he missed again. Steven Adams had a couple. KD went 6 of 18. So there's lots of what ifs both ways. I mean, the bottom
Yeah.
line, the Rockets did what they needed to do. The middle of the fourth quarter, it was anybody's game, and they went out, and after the Cavs cut it to 1, clearly with a better team down the final 6-7 minutes of the game, winning time. And, it started with Aaron Holiday, but boy, when Alperen Şengün does individually what he did against Evan Mobley, I loved his post-game interview with Vanessa Richardson where, Vanessa asked him about not backing down, and Şengün's quote was, "I don't back down against anybody." And so to go to the rim and use his, physicality and bulk advantage to, he paused, but he also knew that because of the strength, if there was a contest, he could create a little bit of extra space. And those are big boy plays. And that's why I know I'm a broken record on this point, but the whole point guard issue for the Rockets, and tonight they actually had 3 point guards between Amen, Reed, and Aaron Holiday. But for the season as a whole, without Fred VanVleet, that's a first 43 minutes problem. The way they're going to run the offense down the stretch of these games is through KD and Şengün. Tonight it was Şengün. He played better for the game overall, and he played at his absolute best when the game was on the line. So kudos to Alpi. This is not a Kevin Durant super team. This is, a two-headed monster.
Şengün, what I really was impressed by tonight was his touch around the basket. Yep. I thought it was really good. I mean, we're coming on the heels of a 30 points and 31 shots game, and this tonight was 10 for 17. The efficiency was up. He just looked very smooth, very comfortable. Mobley did pick him up a lot in the second half. I believe, if I'm remembering the time frame, but they had a lot of Dean Wade or Hunter on him. They were throwing some sort of, wings fours at him. He did a really good job, but he had 12 of his 28 in the fourth. So as to your point, he was the one who closed out the game. Wasn't KD. We'll call KD the closer, but for sure of this team. But tonight, Şengün definitely closed it out.
And he also made 8 of his 10 free throws, which is so big because for the season overall, he was at 69% the last 2 years. He's at 74%. His season-long numbers haven't updated yet, so I think they'll probably be closer to 75 after tonight. I mean, that's a noticeable improvement at the rate that he gets fouled, which to his credit, he's also getting to the line more. But the fact that he's shooting free throws at a much higher rate, that makes it a lot easier to buy in that, all these other things like the threes, the touch that we've been talking about, it makes it a lot easier to buy in that it's not just statistical noise, that he actually has gotten better as a shooter, as a finisher with his touch when the free throws are going up as well, because that's something that's, between seasons fairly constant, and he's making them coming off of Eurobasket. We saw him do it there, and it's absolutely translating to the NBA. If he's a 75% shooter instead of a 69% shooter, that's a huge difference, and it paid off down the stretch tonight, especially because, down the stretch of these close games, he's likely going to get fouled. So if you're not having to hold your breath when he goes to the line, that's a big deal, and it makes the Rockets all the more difficult to defend.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, he was terrific tonight. Speaking of Miss Bunnies, certainly Adams had a few, but the one late by Jabari where he made that beautiful move and weave through traffic, got all the way to the basket. I'm like, oh, that was incredible, Jabari. And he back ironed the layup. I was just, and then they went and quickly scored, and you're like, okay, the game's still going here.
Although I do contend the biggest individual shot of the game in terms of, and this is nothing other than, let's call it Ben win expectancy. And this is completely arbitrary, but the biggest Ben win expectancy shot of the game was that Jabari 3 from the wing right after Mitchell had hit a crazy shot to bring them within 2. It felt like the crowd was trying to will them on. And when Jabari hit that wing 3, and we've talked about it, Jabari has hit so many big threes in the fourth quarter this year through just 13 games. They're 10-3. So you still have 69 of your 82 games left. And for Jabari to have already done this down the stretch of games. I know he needs to make the layups, and the same could be said for men, but yet again, there's Jabari with a massive shot when the game is on the line.
Yeah, Jabari tonight, 3 for 6 from three, team high plus 10. This is, was not the case in past years. He has definitely grown up and progressed and developed quite a bit, where to the point where you're looking up and there are games where he's leading the team in plus minus.
Yeah.
A single box plus minus doesn't always tell the story. I will always say that, but he is up there in net rating with everybody else.
Yeah.
Yes, he's not doing all the heavy lifting. Obviously, that's KD and Şengün, a lot of that, but even when those guys are off the floor, his lineups are holding up right now. So I got to give kudos to Jabari. He had that little scuffle with Tomlin too, which was great. I thought we were going to see something happen there, but go ahead.
And that's potentially useful for the Rockets because you don't have Dylan Brooks anymore. So maybe Jabari, on paper, he's the type of guy who can be that type of enforcer to set the tone. You don't necessarily want your stars to set the tone in case, it gets out of control and somebody gets thrown out. You need a role player to be what Dylan was the last couple of years. And maybe Jabari in year 4 is developing into that. No, I agree with you. The plus minus doesn't lie when it's a sample this large. And I think a lot of it just comes down to he's so well-rounded. Like, there's no clear deficiencies in his game. Like, people ask, is he a good enough three-point shooter? Like, you want him to be closer to 40% with, his profile coming out of Auburn. But I think what's really happened, and this doesn't stand out because especially statistically, it doesn't jump off the page, but he has no real weaknesses anymore. The first half of this game, I thought Amen was much better defensively, and he did really good work against Donovan Mitchell. But I also thought when they were able to force switches, Jabari and KD did really nice work on the perimeter as well. So there were no easy places for the Cavaliers to attack. That's largely been the case this year. And, you talked about the Cavs shooting so well. I mean, you could also point out that maybe some other teams, when the Rockets were struggling defensively earlier this year, were shooting overly well. And so things were due to even out. Maybe it evened out a little bit tonight, and that factored in with the Rockets. Even though the Cavs got going in the second half, 104 points, I suspect it's going to boost the Rockets' defensive rating by a good bit, this performance tonight. But to get back to Jabari, look, there's just no weaknesses. Defensively, he can guard pretty much any position. He can switch across the board. Offensively, he may not be an elite shooter, but he's a very good one. And he has a propensity for making even more, as I just mentioned, when the game's on the line. He can attack closeouts now. He can handle the ball in transition. When you are a team that's top heavy the way the Rockets are, and you have a couple of star players, sometimes the most valuable pieces you can have around them are guys that not necessarily are like really good in some areas, but bad in the others. No, you want just well-rounded, steady, because if other teams are going to try and take guys like Şengün and KD out of the game, then they're going to hunt the weakness. And even if Jabari, doesn't jump off the page in terms of like, what is this elite skill that he has? I also don't see what the weakness is. And I think that's why his numbers are so well. Like, the way teams defend the Rockets well, like they try and force it to, the weakest link. And if guys like Jabari and then fourth quarter Aaron Holiday, I guess, you can say first half Reed Sheppard, he was really good. Let's give him his flowers. But if guys like that are, somewhere between 3 and 5 in your options on the floor at a given time, that's when this team is really going to click, because, it's the total opposite of that Tate, Okogie, and Capella lineup where, there's just so many guys the defenses don't have to respect. If you have well-balanced players that are good in so many areas, you combine that with a top-heavy team that has 2 all-stars, and you get what the Rockets are, which is 10-3 and increasingly trending upward.
Yeah, absolutely. Reed Sheppard, another guy, like, I don't want to say tale of two halves. He was really good in the first. He missed 4 of his final 5 shots. Got burned once or twice gambling. It's not the kind of thing where he got burned because of his size, which is more of a rookie, last year's kind of thing. It was just him, he gets a lot of great defensive plays because he gambles. But a couple of times he gambled and they kind of burned that. Hollins mentioned it on the broadcast. But for the most part, he just looks comfortable. Overall tonight, 5 of 11, 2 of 5 from 3. I mean, 40% from 3. 2 of 5, you're like, oh, he's off tonight. That's 40% from 3. That's Reed Sheppard now, because he's that good. He's become that good of a shooter that you expect him to go 3 for 5. It's insane. So I'll just continue to say it's really good sign. He was +9 tonight. I think he led the team in plus minus at half. he just doesn't, I used to hold my breath when he came into the game, and it's not the case anymore. He just looks comfortable. I'm sure he's going to have moments where he's still going to be burned defensively and all that stuff, but the good is outweighing the bad at this point, certainly.
Yeah, he just looks so much more poised when he has the ball in his hands. I think the shooting was always going to come around, but what impresses me most, Dave, he seems like he's much more he's playing within the flow of the game and taking what the defense gives. Like, I feel like what happened his rookie season and maybe the first couple of games this year, a lot of times he predetermined what the read was going to be or what he was going to do when he went inside the arc. And what you need to do if you're undersized the way he is, you need to be creative. You need to be cerebral. Like the reason we compare the touch he has, the mid-range game, the floater to Chris Paul, like obviously that's the very high-end outcome, but Chris is able he's just so smart. He can always get to his spots on the floor, and that's what it feels like Reed is getting much better at. He was always worst case going to be a good shooter who can space the floor, but what we're seeing now and what really encourages me is he's getting much more comfortable when he's forced inside the arc because as he makes more shots, I thought I was watching the Magic game, the replay on Space City the day after, and what stunned me on the Şengün buzzer beater, you mentioned his touch, by the way. That hook that Şengün made in the final second against Jonathan Isaac was not as easy as he made it look. And he might have gotten fouled. They're probably not going to call it there, given the stakes, but there was contact. Jonathan Isaac's a long defender. That's really good touch. And so, to your point, yeah, he's absolutely improved in that area. But on that play, I was watching the replay. Desmond Bane was all the way out 35 feet away from the basket. Reed Sheppard was literally on the logo 40 feet away, and Bane was still coming out because they didn't want to give Reed, even that far out, a shot to win the game. And so that helped with the spacing there. But I think where this ties into Reed's game tonight, look, as he makes more threes, people are going to chase him off that line. So he's going to go inside the line. And at his size, he can't always get off, I guess, the shot where he in advance thinks he's probably going to get it. He has to be able to adapt in, the blink of an eye to whatever the defense is giving him. And maybe it's going to the rim, maybe it's the floater, maybe it's the mid-range shot, maybe it's going left, maybe it's going right. There's all sorts of potential outcomes there. But I don't think he is forcing it as much anymore. He seems much more calm within himself. And so if he can play with that level of IQ and anticipation to where he's reading the game as it comes, he's not predetermining, then yeah, that's how he can be not just a shooter, but a very good, potentially great offensive player overall, a scorer. Reed Sheppard's got the shooting down. It's can he get that scoring gene? That's going to determine whether or not he eventually becomes the offensive star that the Rockets, according to Tim McMahon of ESPN, believe he can be. And, sample is still small. And, the second half, it wasn't like he played poorly, but I thought, when the Cavaliers hit him with that run, there's an obvious tendency to go back to the more veteran-laden guys as opposed to trusting Reed Sheppard. He's just not going to get the same runway when the game is, gone from 20-2 the way it had when Reed was playing in those second half minutes, largely not of his doing. So I think just sort of game feel, that wasn't necessarily a time for Reed to sort of put his imprint on the game. And, it wasn't like Holiday took over. To be clear, some people say, well, what about Holiday? No, I think it's more Holiday started because, they were shading off of him to cover the likes of Kevin Durant, and he got shots from the floor of the offense. It wasn't necessarily a time for Reed to create in the half court the way he did in the first half. But yeah, the first half I thought was really encouraging. It's what we've seen all year, and you don't want to put too much on him because, it's still just the first month of his second season, but these are really promising signs for a 21-year-old in just the first month of year two.
Yeah, and I did love overall what we saw in the first half. I'm a big defense guy. I love the offense. Don't get me wrong. I love the Rockets are number one in offense. They're hanging, have a slight edge here over the Nuggets, number two. And I love this. It's great. But I just know what it's like when we get to the playoffs and how big that defense is. So I love when I see the Rockets play the way they did in the first half. And Donovan, Ime Thompson's point of attack defense. And he got a lot of help too. It wasn't just him, but on Mitchell was fantastic. Mitchell had 2 points on 1 of 7 shooting through 3 quarters. Everything that he did was in the fourth because he just started firing away. But it leads me to the point here. We're talking about this offense defense thing where on deck is the Denver Nuggets, and it is the NBA Cup. And the Rockets, lost their first game in NBA Cup action, won their next one over the Blazers. But that first one against the Spurs, we kind of thought, well, maybe their chances of getting in are going to be a little bit tough. San Antonio's down Wemby. They're down Castle now. They're not going to have those guys for their cup. They could lose, is what I'm getting at. Rockets could pass them, but they have 2 games remaining: Denver at home and Golden State on the road. It's going to be a great matchup because right now, as far as offensive and defensive rating, they are mirrors of each other, Denver and Houston right now. Like I said, Houston's number 1 in offensive rating. Denver's number 2, and I think Denver is a better defensive team by 1+ points or so. It's going to be really interesting to watch this game. I'm really looking forward to it Friday night. What do you think how this could play out with the Cup, and of course starting with this game Friday?
Yeah, I think this to me feels like an Alperen Şengün game. Like so much is going to be focused on the Şengün matchup versus Jokic in the middle, and so I think Şengün typically takes those games against Nikola pretty seriously, and there's added stakes from the Cup this time, and I think it'll be up and down. Both teams are good, but not great defensively. Offensively, the firepower is through the roof. If you're Houston, one of the things that I like, it's still too early to say for sure, but you mentioned a men's defense tonight being a lot better, which I would agree, especially the first 3 quarters. And really, it's not like the defense on Donovan was bad in the fourth. It's more he just went on a heater and hit some tough step back threes. But if you buy into the idea that a men being the full-time point guard might take away from the juice that he has defensively, I still think that's too early to say. But if you have not only Reed, but also Aaron Holiday in your rotation who can do a decent bit of the ball handling, then potentially that gives you the better version of a men as well. And so hopefully you'll have that against Jamal Murray on Friday night. Look, I think Kevin Durant's the easy one to point to because he needs to shoot better than 6 of 18, what he did tonight. But look what KD has been doing the last 10 days. He's going to be fine. He's Kevin Durant, assuming health. I think especially in a big game, he's likely to step up. I think it's that Şengün Jokic matchup, almost combined their names there. Not saying Şengün needs to outplay him, but I think if he's competitive, and I think he's good enough to, we saw the Eurobasket game, the all-time classic between Turkey and Serbia that Turkey actually won, came back, and Şengün made a lot of plays down the stretch. If you get that version of Şengün, then I think the rest of the Rockets, it's not head and shoulders above Denver, but if Şengün is competitive with Jokic, then I like the Rockets' chances at home with the other guys they have relative to Denver's supporting cast. So that's why I'm focusing on that. Şengün obviously is the story going in because he was the best player on the floor tonight in Cleveland, but I also think just the way these 2 teams stack up, if there's no clear advantage for Jokic over Şengün, and there might be a little bit of advantage, but there's no large advantage, then I like Houston's chances. Like, it's not such a commanding advantage to where you'd say, well, they should win. No, both teams are good. And if Denver has a good shooting night and Houston's cold, then, it is what it is. But if Şengün is competitive against Jokic and you have to like your chances after what we saw tonight against Evan Mobley, then I think Houston will have every opportunity in the fourth quarter to win that game.
It's kind of like when we talk about the Rockets, in past videos. Should you double Şengün? Should you take your chances and not getting burned by KD and the other guys and leave him single covered? Obviously, you have to have a tough defender on him. That's what Ime, at least historically, tries to do here: is let Şengün guard Jokic in the post. Yep. Jokic, I'm sure, is going to, in the past, was inefficient. Now, there were some games where Jamal Murray was out or other players were out, but still, the Rockets beat them, I think, fully healthy in Denver. I think it was last year. That's what I think, what I'm expecting. It's going to be a game where Şengün wants to show out against Jokic, and I think they're going to single cover him and try not to let, those doubles, because Jokic is kind of like Şengün, so good at finding the open man.
There's going to be a lot of one-on-one on both sides, yes.
Yeah, and so that's what I'm expecting in that game. It's going to be a good one. And the stats actually are out, and the Rockets still maintain their number 1 offensive rating, 123 even, and Denver's number 2 at 122.2. So we'll see. Maybe this game will change that. Hopefully not. But
a couple other quick comments from the chat. Yeah. Someone mentioned the potential of using the 3 centers against Jokic. I agree that they'll try and play Şengün one-on-one as much as they can, but it is a good tool to have in it's a good club to have in your bag. Want to get the analogy right? Because if Şengün gets in foul trouble, then yeah, it could be beneficial that you don't have to put Şengün on him. There are alternatives. And by the way, I think the Rockets starting Steven tonight, I think it went fairly well, but I think the bigger picture takeaway there is that Dorian Finney-Smith, whenever he gets back, I still think that by the playoffs, it is very likely that he is your fifth starter. Like the fact that the Rockets went from starting, I think this was the first time since the first week of the year that the Rockets started Steven and Alpi. They had been starting Josh Okogie and downsizing, but the fact that they're still, even with all these wins, they're 10-3, they've won 10 of their last 11, that they're still willing to sort of switch, mix and match, tells you that they're still not 100% sold on any particular group being the group. And so I think that assuming he comes back healthy, I still think Dorian Finney-Smith is eventually the guy, barring an improbable Fred VanVleet return late in the season. But for now, yeah, it's very useful that you can turn to that. And these games coming up, yeah, Denver, you might need the additional size against Jokic if Şengün gets in foul trouble. The Warriors, we know what the double big did against them in the playoffs, and that's the other NBA Cup game coming up. You mentioned the injuries the Spurs have, so I can't see the Spurs winning at both Portland and Denver without Wemby and Castle. So I think it's all right in front of the Rockets. If they win these last two games, I think it's overwhelmingly likely that they win the group. Not mathematically certain, but very likely. So yeah, it's all in front of them, and I feel like they'll go as far as Şengün can take them in this matchup against Jokic. And coming off a game like tonight, like you've got to feel good about it. And the last comment in the chat I wanted to address, someone asking, why aren't more people talking about the Rockets? Well, I think if you look at the national TV slate, a lot of the Rockets games on big networks are in the second half of the season. I don't know why that's the case, but they actually haven't had a ton of marquee matchups on national TV the first night, or the first month, excuse me. Tonight was one of them. Tonight was an ESPN game in addition to Space City. So I suspect, especially with the Rockets having won 10 of 11, and now there's another national game on Friday, I suspect over the next 24 to 48 hours, you're going to hear a lot more talk about the Rockets nationally because it's too good to ignore, and now they're getting those national spotlight games.
Yep. So that we'll probably have Rockets Denver on Friday. 3 20-point scores already this year. Denver currently with Gordon, Murray, and Jokic. That's going to be a great game. And keep in mind, to Ben's point, Rockets really, I'll say 3, but they're missing 2 key rotation players that will be back this year, and Dorian Finney-Smith and, of course, Tari Eason. I mean, Fred is a huge player for this team, but he could come back, but unlikely to come back this year. And, of course, next year's team could change. So, it's just amazing. The Rockets are 10-3 at this point, missing some of those guys. So fantastic all around work for the Rockets. Huge win. Ben, appreciate you doing this. We